So you've done it, you made it through the workday, the screen's off, laptop closed, and you collapse onto the sofa, maybe grab your phone, maybe the remote, and you let out that big sigh, that one that feels like, finally, I can rest.
Right. And that sigh, that feeling of relief, that's exactly where we need to start this deep dive. Because if we actually look at what's happening perceptually, how the mind organizes things, that moment, it often isn't rest at all. It's really more the sound of, well, a change of gears. It's the sound of substitution.
Substitution, wow. That's a really strong word. It implies the work, the labor, it actually never stops. We just kind of swap out what's demanding our attention.
That's precisely it. Yeah, our mission here really is to pull back the curtain on that whole exchange. We're going to use some core ideas from perception science, specifically from Gestalt psychology, to understand why so much of what we call downtime actually leaves us feeling, well, more scattered, more exhausted than before. It's about telling the difference between real rest and just distraction.
Okay, let's unpack that using Gestalt. My understanding is it's really about how we structure our world, right? Into what grabs our focus and what's just kind of there in the background.
It is, fundamentally. Gestalt is the science of perception. See, the mind is constantly organizing. It craves structure. It carves out what seems important or urgent right now, that email, this conversation, a movie scene that becomes the figure.
The thing you're focused on.
Exactly. And everything else, the background hum, the stuff you're tuning out, your own internal state maybe, that's the ground.
So figure is the main event, ground is the context. Makes sense.
Yes. Now think about that moment you switch from work to rest. When that work deadline figure dissolves, what do most of us do? Almost instantly.
Reach for something else. Phone, usually.
Right. You don't let the field settle. You immediately swap in a new figure. You trade that high-demand work project figure for another, often just a consuming figure.
Yeah.
The social media feed, the next episode, the game.
I see. So I thought I was, turning off the cognitive engine, shutting it down. But really, I was just changing the input. Instead of focusing hard on a spreadsheet, I'm focusing just as hard on, like, 1,000 little bits of information flying past. The actual process of paying attention hasn't stopped.
The labor of attending, of forming that figure-ground relationship, it's still fully engaged. You've just swapped, say, a demanding analytical task for maybe a more demanding, fragmented, stimulus-driven one. You're performing distraction.
Performing distraction.
Yeah. The mental energy you're using to constantly parse, anticipate, react, that engine is still roaring. It's just burning different fuel, and that right there is the substitution trap.
Okay, this really helps explain why that feeling of true stillness, just sitting quietly without any input, why that can feel so almost painful sometimes. We're sort of addicted to having something to lock onto.
We really are. And this is where the nature of the ground becomes so crucial. We tend to think of the ground, that background awareness, as if it's just empty space, soft, passive. But it's not.
It's not empty.
Not at all. The ground is this living, active field. It's charged with everything we push aside, potentials, memories we haven't processed, unspoken needs, all those unresolved issues.
So when we stop actively creating external figures, when the screen finally goes dark, the ground doesn't just stay quiet, it starts to well up.
It starts to rise, exactly. We fill our lives with figures, with constant stimulation, not just because we enjoy it, but because those figures are fantastic armor. They're colorful, engaging ways to keep the ground from becoming the foreground.
If you keep the screens on, keep scrolling, keep consuming.
You successfully keep that background noise in the background.
But the moment we allow actual silence, that hum of anxiety about the future, or maybe old regrets, or just big life questions we haven't faced, that stuff gets louder.
It comes forward. So often, we're not just escaping the stress of the job, we're escaping the stress of, well, ourselves, our own presence.
We're resting from ourselves.
That's the deeper layer, yes. There's a thought, I think it was Nietzsche, about how we often seek rest from ourselves, not just from external pressures. Stillness feels dangerous because it means facing that background material and integrating that. That's real internal work we often prefer to put off.
And that deferred work, that backlog, that must add to the overall exhaustion, right? Even when we think we're relaxing, part of the mind is busy holding that stuff down, busy avoiding.
It absolutely is. And that avoidance builds up a kind of a cognitive debt, because the mind, fundamentally, it really dislikes incompleteness. Which brings us to a really key Gestalt principle. Pregnance.
Pregnance. Okay. Sounds a bit technical.
There's been something like pithiness or good form, really. It's this core drive and perception. Your brain wants closure. It's always trying to organize experience into the most complete, stable, simple form it can manage.
Okay.
So if you leave something unresolved, like a task unfinished, it creates this lingering tension, a kind of cognitive itch.
Like that Zeigarnik effect, where you remember unfinished tasks better than finished ones?
Yeah. Precisely that, yes. Now, think about how that applies to our modern digital diet when we're trying to rest. You're tired from work, you're seeking resolution, you want that feeling of completion, of pregnance. But what does the content typically offer you?
Well, fragments mostly. Short clips, videos that just stop, listicles you only skim, cliffhangers designed to keep you clicking or swiping.
Exactly. Every single incomplete bit, that 7-second joke that cuts off abruptly, the recipe that shows the process but maybe not the finished dish, that news clip ending right before the counter-argument.
Yeah.
It's all deliberately withholding resolution. Each one creates a tiny, unfinished gestalt, an open loop that stays active in your awareness.
So my brain is basically taking out a tiny loan every time, tagging each fragment as unfinished business.
You are accumulating microtensions, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, at an incredible rate. You might feel momentarily entertained, sure, but you're also paying interest on all these tiny cognitive debts, that rapid-fire consumption. It's built for engagement, not for resolution. It keeps your attention bouncing wildly from figure to figure.
Never letting anything actually settle.
Never letting any figure fully complete and recede back into the ground naturally.
Okay, that's why I sometimes feel buzzy but also weirdly empty after scrolling for a while. I haven't actually rested. I've just done this kind of high-speed mental inventory of 1,000 unfinished things.
And that just compounds, it builds into this deep mental fatigue. Your rest isn't a pause, it's actually a period of aggressively accumulating low-grade anxiety and tension.
Right. This means we need a totally different definition of rest then. It can't just be about consuming more stuff. I like your analogy about the stomach you wouldn't call just shoveling food and resting your digestion.
Exactly. Rest has to be about digestion, not just more consumption. In real rest, you're allowing the system, the perceptual field, to process and integrate what's already there. If attention is like a sculptor, constantly shaping figures,
then true rest is putting the tools down.
Yes, letting the material settle. The more figures you keep feeding with your attention, even if they seem pleasant, the more crowded and agitated the mind becomes.
Can we use the lake metaphor? I find that helpful.
Sure. Think of the mind like a still lake. Every notification, every binge-watched episode, every half-read article, it's like throwing a stone into that lake.
Creates ripples.
Creates ripples, exactly. And those ripples constantly fracture the surface. When the surface is all choppy like that, nothing can settle. You can't see any depth. You lose that reflective quality.
And true rest.
Yeah.
That's about letting the water become still again, allowing the ripples to just dissolve on their own.
It's about what you allow to dissolve. That's key. True rest is a kind of deep receptivity. It's allowing the whole field of your awareness to reorganize itself spontaneously without you constantly jumping in trying to fix it or force a certain state like calm.
It sounds like a pretty profound kind of surrender. But how do we even begin to do that? Our whole lives feel geared towards resolving things, not just letting them be.
Well, true rest is a deep kind of cessation. It's about letting attention exist without feeling the immediate compulsion to resolve it. It's mastering the art of allowing thoughts or feelings to just float by, trusting that the field will self-organize if you just stop frantically trying to fill every single perceived gap.
I can almost hear people listening, though, thinking, yeah, but when I try to do nothing, I just feel bored out of my mind or anxious.
And that's the critical moment. That's the confrontation, and it's actually a really valuable moment. Think about this story of Daniel. Daniel had this perfect, highly structured wind-down routine, the herbal tea, a very specific meditation app sequence he followed religiously, then exactly one episode of some highbrow prestige drama.
Okay, sounds familiar.
And he woke up exhausted every single morning. Convinced the problem was he just wasn't doing enough self-care, or not the right kind.
He was just swapping one set of intense figures for another, slightly more virtuous feeling set. Still totally structured and controlled.
Precisely. Until one night, big storm, the internet goes out. Completely. Takes down his streaming, his apps, even his fancy smart lights weren't working right. He was furious at first. Tried reading, couldn't focus. He was basically forced into silence, just sitting there in the relative dark.
The ground started rising.
Oh yeah. First came the panic, the intense boredom. He felt the absence of the figure, that accustomed stimulation really acutely. But then, after maybe 15, 20 minutes of just sitting there feeling miserable, something else started to surface.
What?
Not the big, loud, chaotic stress he expected, but quieter things. Unresolved feelings, yeah, but also just awarenesses. A difficult conversation with his father he'd been putting off. An old creative project he suddenly remembered with fondness. Even just a deep sense of gratitude for something small that happened that day he hadn't paused to notice.
And he didn't have to do anything about them, just let them come up.
He just allowed them to be there, in the field. He found himself resting with himself, finally, not from himself. The ground rose, and instead of fleeing or grabbing for another distraction, he just allowed it. He let the field hold the material. And that's the insight, really. Peace isn't found in the specific object or activity you chase. It's found in the overall organization of the field itself. Rest isn't the opposite of work, it's the opposite of avoidance.
Okay. So, wrapping this deep dive up, the core idea seems incredibly clear now. The fatigue so many of us feel, it isn't just about needing more sleep. It's a huge signal that our rest is often just more cognitive labor in disguise. It's actually fragmenting us further.
And so the invitation then isn't necessarily to stop enjoying things, stop consuming content altogether, but rather to start noticing. Notice when that consumption shifts from enjoyment into becoming, well, armor. Or a kind of anesthetic, something you use to numb yourself against the richness, sometimes the uncomfortable richness, of your own inner world. We distract ourselves so effectively because deep down, maybe we're a little afraid of our own depth. We mistake it for emptiness.
So, if we can't just force this stillness, and we're so used to that constant mental motion, what's maybe the first tiniest step someone could take? Tonight, even, towards that kind of deep perceptual surrender you're talking about.
The very first step can be incredibly simple, almost laughably so. The next time you finish something consuming, scrolling a feed, watching a video, finishing a work email, just pause. Before you immediately reach the next thing, allow maybe a 5-second gap. Just 5 seconds.
Okay.
Acknowledge the absence of the screen or the music or whatever the stimulus was. Just notice the ground. It won't feel empty, I promise. It'll be full of information, even in just 5 seconds. Notice what's there.
That feels doable.
Okay.
So we'll leave you with this final question then, something maybe to just mull over as you go into your own evening, your own transition time. What if rest isn't actually something you do? Not another task to schedule or a state you have to somehow achieve or earn?
What if, instead, rest is something you fundamentally are? What if beneath all those figures, the roles you play, the tasks you juggle, the content you consume, the distractions, what if there's a ground of your being that is always resting, always whole, always complete already? Maybe pay attention to the silence between the words, that dimension, it's already here. We just need to stop throwing stones in the lake long enough to notice it.